All right. Welcome to the weekend edition of International Soccer Break. I have Rahi and I have Bick. I should actually display your names right there so that people are looking
Oh, that's where we are.
live from London. And we're missing our MLS boy this weekend, but
I know, on a big weekend for MLS too. The new MLS playoffs, which by the way, I'm kind of excited about. I was surprisingly intrigued by the way they've gone so far.
yeah, he was sending us pictures the whole weekend, which we'll have to display somewhere on the other social media. Bick actually has been gallivanting around the globe as well, so we'll get into that in a second. But let me kick it off with the thing I want to talk about this weekend, which is a certain De Classica.
That was a good pronunciation. That was a great pronunciation. Yeah, very, very good.
Vic, did you like that? Did you think that was
I enjoyed that. I'm not an expert on German. I'm saving my learning for next year when the Euros are in Germany, but I think from what I know, I think that sounded good. Happy with that.
That's good. I appreciate that. But it was the only thing classic about it was the title, because the actual game was a complete demolition by Bayern Munich beating Dortmund. And, it's funny because this used to be a very competitive fixture. Maybe 5-6 years ago, there was a Champions League final, which basically Dortmund and Bayern Munich were in the final during the times of Arjen Robben and that whole Bayern team against a very competitive Dortmund team. But now things are very different.
Yeah. I mean, how long has it been since Dortmund beat Bayern Munich? I think 5 years in the league in this fixture. It's been very one-sided. I mean, Bayern Munich has won the title, 11 times in a row? Yeah. I mean, it's not really fair. Did you really expect any different outcome, Bix? I mean, looking at this game, I never thought Borussia Dortmund's good. This is going to be the time they win, based on both the rosters and who's playing for both teams. I don't think they really had a chance.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it. And to be honest, the Bundesliga has been very lopsided for a while. We talk about lopsided leagues. I know we've mentioned La Liga in the past. England's supposed to be very lopsided, but at least over there you have Celtic dominating for a few years, Rangers dominating for a few years. It's very rare to see a team win for an entire decade. But yeah, I guess this was their chance. Bayern haven't done amazingly well this year. They're actually second in the table.
They were coming off a very bad loss in the German Cup to Saarbrücken, a lower division team. And essentially, if there was any time that they were going to get them, it was this weekend. And the performance was just atrocious.
But it was a capitulation. I think what they scored in the 6th minute, right? Off the most basic marking. And you lose Upamecano on a corner kick, and he's just wide open. I mean, they were
Dayo Apuk. I'm even messing up his name, but I can't even his name is messing up right now. But he's not the one who you're expecting to score major goals like that, and
if you leave him that open in the 6-yard box, then he's the one you're expecting to score. I mean, I don't know what to say about Dortmund. It's not only that, I mean, this goes back to last year when they had the league in their hands on the last day, and they couldn't do the simplest thing, which is get a win to secure the league. It's these, in this game, they just laid down, and I don't blame them on one hand. Player for player, they're not a competitive team with Bayern Munich, right? You look at Musiala, you look at Sané, you look at Goretzka, you look at Harry Kane, and you look at the other side, and it's not competitive at the moment. And that's the part of the problem, right? The Dortmund players leave for bigger clubs at a certain point. In the past, they've actually gone to Bayern Munich as the next step.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look what Jude's doing at Real Madrid, right? So it's clearly a team that has lost some firepower.
Yeah, but the thing is, during the game itself, there was terrible midfield play. They kept giving the ball away. Niklas Füllkrug, who seems to always score for Germany, didn't do anything this game. Marco Reus, I can't believe Marco Reus, we're still saying his name that often. It seems like he was on the 2014,
But that's the point.
World. Yeah.
That's the point. Is one of the stars, if you will, is Marco Reus, who's well beyond his prime as a player. I mean, he's had to deal with injuries, yes, but I mean, that's who you have. On the other side, you have, both the young and the old, right? Musiala and Kane, both excellent players in their own right. And I don't know how you can look at those two teams and think it would be a particularly competitive game.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I do want to say is you talk about, just from an American perspective real quickly, Gio Reyna, the fact that he is, struggling to kind of make his mark on this team, given the roster we just talked about. That's a whole nother issue, so.
Yeah, it's weird. We've heard some things about injuries, about keeping him fit, that he can't maybe play a full game. And now that he's fully back and healthy, there's real questions as to why he's not playing. I mean, it's not as if they've lit things on fire, Borussia Dortmund, right? So they could benefit from his guile in the midfield. They were giving the ball away. The one thing he doesn't do that often is give the ball away. He's good on the ball. Maybe he's not the most physical player, but you'd like to think that he'd be an upgrade over the way that they're playing now. So it is confusing. I don't know if it says more about the way he's perceived in the organization or about him as a player.
Yeah, so now switching gears a little bit, talking about, Harry Kane having a huge hat trick for Bayern Munich. I guess, being a England fan, it's pretty unique to see a player doing this well as a striker, especially going to the top club in Germany and having such an immediate impact.
Yeah, and I think what tops it is that he's not even the best English player in Europe at this point. You've got Bellingham in Madrid, so yeah, I think that bodes really well for England. Yeah, and then I think we've discussed this in the past, but English players traditionally haven't even gone to the continent, let alone do well there. So I think that bodes really well for England, and it shows a new mentality where they know they need to test themselves across the world, and I guess primarily across Europe. And I think the fact that it's in Germany next year, I think, is an even better indicator for the national team. So it looks like it's definitely like a new generation.
Is this more than you would have expected? I mean, we know how good Harry Kane was at Tottenham. We know how good he was, but he was good at. I want to be careful how I talk about Tottenham, but an inferior team, certainly. Maybe a Premier League winning team this season. But is this beyond your expectations? I mean, he's done incredibly well. As with Jude Bellingham, I mean, could you have expected this? Did you expect this as an England fan?
I think, look, I do think the Premier League is more competitive. And if you just put the 19 teams outside of Bayern versus the 19 teams outside of Spurs, I think you do have more competition. But I still think just because you do well in a slightly better league doesn't necessarily translate to doing well in a different league. So I think just that itself is a good sign. It would be interesting to see how English players will do in Italy, for example, because I think German football and English football are similar in terms of how they're set up. The footballing cultures are quite similar.
Mm-hmm. How hard do you think it is? This is the one thing I was thinking about. How hard do you think it is for an Englishman to go into Germany, especially a club like Bayern Munich, right? Someone who's played their whole life in England and then going over to Germany. How hard do you think that transition is?
I think the biggest thing is English. I want to be careful here. I don't want to say English people don't travel too well, but the thing is,
they don't.
A lot of English people, like it's a slightly more insular football culture. Whereas if you're in Germany, there are a lot of German players who've come to England. There's a tradition of it. There are a lot of Spanish players and Italian players who've come to England as well. Pretty much all over Europe, everyone speaks English to varying degrees, and I would say actually Germans and Scandinavians and the Dutch generally speak English as well, if not better than the English in a lot of cases.
Right.
So I think which like if you hear a lot of Scandies and Germans speaking, they generally speak it very fluently. So I think the language barrier is pretty big, and I think there is not really a tradition of English going abroad and doing. So I think just from that point of view, but I think once you get beyond that hurdle, I don't really see why it necessarily would be that difficult.
Yeah, especially considering the service he's getting. I mean, these 3 goals were on a platter. Great finish, good finishes, but they were all one-on-one with the goalie on a platter for him.
Yeah.
Do you think Tuchel's team talks have to be in German, right? He does them in German, I assume, with an English, half in German, half in English. I mean, I know he speaks English, but the majority of the team is German, so Harry Kane's got to be picking up some German or having to listen to team talks in German.
I'm sure he's picking it up along the way. I just wonder whether there's really any instruction for Harry Kane in particular. I mean, he's up top, right? He's not really connecting,
score
attacking.
goals.
How do you say score in goals in German? Finish.
Sure.
I don't know. Jude, on the other hand,
understand
Jude
what
has
you
learned
mean.
Spanish quite well. His Spanish is pretty decent, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah. He's speaking okay for an Englishman.
Well, I mean, Jude did play in Germany, right? So he's like, for him, it's just like,
Good point. Mm-hmm.
he's used to it.
Yeah. All right, let's switch over to somewhere else now that we've kind of discussed Harry Kane and his his excellence in Germany, as Bikram said, which is a hard place for Englishmen to go. But let's switch over to Rahi. What do you want to talk about?
I want to go back to England. I want to go back to England to talk about, I think, the game of the weekend, which was Arsenal-Newcastle. A game full of controversy. Ultimately, Arsenal losing a big loss, in my opinion, a big win for Newcastle. It was an even game, a very good Newcastle performance. They're very relentless. They're a fun team to watch. But ultimately, this result hinges on a goal that went through the VAR ringer. I mean, if you want to talk about a goal that was through the VAR factory and dissected every replay, this was it, because there were 3 different incidents in this goal that were subject to VAR. And the incredible thing about this goal is that all 3 of them were so close and they could have gone either way. And somehow they all go in the favor of Newcastle. And so the goal ends up standing and they end up winning the game on this goal. It's a very interesting case study in VAR's effectiveness. I'm ultimately okay with this because in the end, I think a goal standing, unless it's blatantly wrong, is better because that's the intention, I think. There's nothing about this goal to me that stands out as blatantly wrong. When you go to the replay, you can see that maybe there's reason to overturn it. But ultimately, as a viewer, I'm fine with this goal standing. Mikel Arteta clearly was not. He called it a disgrace. But I completely disagree with him calling it a disgrace. I think if you're an Arsenal fan, you can feel aggrieved. You can say this shouldn't have been given. And there are reasons why you are right. But you can't say that this is a disgrace or that there wasn't a possibility that the decision that they made could have been made. Effectively, what it was the ball out? Was there a push in the box? And was it offsides? Those were the 3 different pieces, and they went one by one to evaluate whether it should stand or not. So I'm going to ask the 2 of you. Let's start with the first one, which was the ball out?
I don't think the ball was out. I think because there was remember that goal in the World Cup, the Japan-Germany goal, where basically that ball looked more out than this one. And then we learned from that, basically you have to look at an aerial view, kind of like a bird's eye view down. And if that part of that ball is over the line, it's okay. So I don't think the ball was out.
It looked out, but the angle that they showed us was from in front of the line. So again, the aerial view, I think, probably would have shown that like a part of the ball was on the line. So I think to the naked eye, it looked out, but I can also see why it's not out. But there was enough doubt for me to not worry about it too much, I think.
Yeah, for me, initially I thought it was out. Watching it live, I thought they're going to overturn this. It's out. It looked out. But then watching the replay, I thought, well, maybe it's slightly in, right? And ultimately, the whole ball has to be out. So there was enough of a shadow of a doubt where I thought, yeah, maybe a little bit of the ball is in. It's hard for me to say. Again, I don't think it, like, I think the play continued. He wins the ball. There's no one really around him. I think it didn't, like, it's on a knife's edge, but I think it's fair in the end. It looked out to me, but I can see why they called it in.
Yeah, and also I think we have to remember the ball is spherical, right? So even though the center of gravity of the ball is is completely out of the line, even if there's a sliver on the line, it's not out. The whole ball has to be behind the line. And,
and it
there's
wasn't.
enough doubt.
and it wasn't. Yeah, and the whole ball wasn't, like, from a spherical perspective, it wasn't.
Yeah.
But then going to your next point, the shove you're saying is the next.
Yeah, Joel Linton basically has two hands, right, and kind of pushes off a bit. And that initially, when I first saw that replay, I thought, oh, it's a foul. But if you watch it, the defender's leaning forward a bit at the time in which the contact is made. So for me, it's not a hard push. I don't love calling that in the box anyways. I don't love a foul, a goal being overturned for a foul for VAR. I don't love that. So in the end, I thought it was a foul on first look, but then I think, well, it's...
I guess the question is it a clear and obvious error?
Good point. I don't think so.
So exactly. So I think if I was a referee and if I had full view of it, it would have been a foul. But it's not as blatant a foul. Like, if I had to 0 to 100, it's probably like 60 or 65 for me. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it was I don't even think, it was a foul. Yeah, you could have called it either way, but I don't think it was a blatant situation where I would be saying, oh, this person was in no way, shape, or form, okay, in terms of just the play that was going on. I don't think that you could definitively say, oh, okay, we need to overturn that because I saw, a push there. So I don't think that's the case.
I think if the referee had given it a foul, then it wouldn't have been overturned the other way either.
Agreed.
Exactly. Right.
So I think it was more 50-50 than, like, this is definitely a foul.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is ultimately the thing, right? No matter how much you have VAR, it's a judgment call. There is human judgment involved. You can't say that's a foul. That's not it's difficult. Yeah. Especially in real time because the contact happens quickly. And yes, you see the two hands
in the air,
but things are happening fast.
Yeah.
And then the third one is the offsides, which is the question is Anthony Gordon offside because David Raya comes out, right? So then he's no longer the last man anymore. That one's tough to tell, but again, on first glance, I thought it was offsides. Yeah. But then you keep watching some of the replays and you think, well, it's tight.
For me, there was enough doubt in there as well to not overturn it.
I
couldn't even see the ball, to be honest.
Even that one I was confused about a little bit because I didn't understand the view I saw. Essentially, you see David Raya and the defender, and you see David Raya is coming from behind a little bit from where the player is. So I don't know how that was okay. That one I was a little bit less certain about.
Well, it's whether Gordon was beyond Raya or not when the ball is headed, because Joel Linton wins the header on the push.
Right. Exactly.
On push.
So when Joel Linton gets the ball, right, that exact moment, I suppose there's a split second where Gordon's level, and I think that's why they called it a goal. But basically, as the play develops, there's no way he's level.
Of course, but it's when the ball.
What I'm saying is at that exact moment, right?
Yeah.
From an untrained eye, if you're looking at that, I'd say you have to call it offside. Now, VAR can go back and say, okay, it's onside, but they didn't even call that offside initially, right? They were looking at other stuff there. So that was interesting to me.
That's a really difficult one to call on the field because you have to understand. The goalie comes out, so it switches. It's not a natural thing to think about as a linesman.
Yeah.
But I think
there's so many bodies in there as well. Like you couldn't even see the ball properly on replay.
Yeah.
So,
but that was a situation where basically I think because of the fact that it's not a situation that linesmen are looking out for. So that situation doesn't even come into play unless VAR is a thing, which it obviously is now. What I'm saying is that is a situation that if in fact he turned out to be offside, that would be only VAR that would be able to call that offside because it's not something that the linesman is thinking about in the initial play.
So what you're saying is that in this case, the call on the field, to borrow from America's case, is less important. It's not relevant because the ball being out of bounds, the push, those were saying the call on the field matters. But this one, the call on the field doesn't matter as much because it wouldn't have been called anyways.
Exactly. That's the way I look at this. Yeah.
This one I thought was, honestly, I thought it was offsides. It was very, very close, but it looked offsides to me.
Yeah. So just extrapolating out now, obviously, Arteta is fuming about this. Where do we think Arsenal is? Because a few weeks ago, they beat Man City, come off a huge high, and now we're in this position here where they're almost back to where they usually are, right behind the top team and starting to drop points.
Well, I think the problem is we make these rash judgments, right? We said the same thing. Manchester City lost to Wolves, and now Arsenal beating Manchester City, a huge victory. But now look, they have the draw and they have this loss. I don't think it's easy enough to look and say, oh, this is the same old Arsenal, or this is a new Arsenal. Yeah. Ultimately, it comes down to picking up points. It's a long season that as the Champions League picks up, the fixture congestion's going to become more relevant as well. And it just matters in terms of can you pick up points when you need to? So this is a big loss, but it doesn't say anything about Arsenal's mentality. I mean, this is a very good Newcastle team. Manchester City will drop points moving forward. Tottenham will drop points. I mean, these teams at the top are going to drop points.
But I don't think City is going to drop that many points.
I think they're going to drop points.
They've lost 2 games already, right? I mean, they will slip up here and there, but not too many slip-ups. That they're not a team that gives you too many chances.
They haven't traditionally, but I also think that it's not like there's a quota that you have to lose only 3 games this season. So you've already done 2. You're only going to lose 1 for the rest of the season, right? I think you put a bit of pressure on them, and you never know where things are. I agree with Rahi. I don't think it necessarily says that much. They kept on attacking towards the end, and one of those chances could have gone in, and then all of a sudden we talk about how resilient they are. So I think it's just. Sometimes I think you can't read too much into matches. They just happen. They lost. That decision didn't go their way. There was another decision that did go their way, which I think we should also talk about.
Kai
Havertz, which I think was 100% a red card. I think that was a very dangerous tackle. He flew in. Both his feet were off the ground. He was quite far away. And, we've seen red cards given for a lot less. And I think he was quite lucky to get away with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it was a red card, 100%. And so that's why I think Arteta's press conference signals exactly what we're talking about, just frustration about the fact that he knows how important these points are. That you need every single point this year because it's going to be so tight at the top.
Yeah.
And that's why he's so angry. It's not really a disgrace. I'm sorry. I completely disagree with what he's saying. He's just angry because they lost pivotal points. It's not a disgrace. Kai Havertz should have been sent off. I mean, the decisions 100%. Are going to be made both ways. And honestly, it was evaluated in a very fair way. It's unfortunate as an Arsenal fan because every single one of those things could have gone the other way. They didn't. Yeah. But I have no issue with VAR's process in this case. And I don't think it's a disgrace. I think it's just unfortunate. It's unlucky. It's unlucky if you're Arsenal. It's unlucky.
I 100% agree with you there. I guess the only question around VAR that I would have is, do you think that referees are abdicating their responsibilities on the field to give decisions because they know VAR will take care of it?
I think so. And I think to a certain degree, I mean, this is sort of what I was alluding to prior. I don't think that offside is something that the linesman can, figure out. But if the referee sees, that looks like a push, or if he says, okay, that ball looks like it's out of bounds, you got to call it. Now, it's hard. I see the other side of it too, because let's say he calls the ball out of bounds. That play never happens, right? Like, you know, they might call it dead then, and then it turns out to be a legit goal. So you see both sides of it.
Yeah. So then I guess my question is, should there be, because basically
we're not go back to your point, are they abdicating that? I believe yes, but is that the right decision? Perhaps yes, babe. Perhaps it is best to abdicate your responsibility as a ref.
Yeah, but then in that case, should there then be as much given to the referee's decision on the ground? Or should the referee say, actually, I don't have a view on this. You guys make the call and then let's decide. So rather than say, well, I mean, he didn't give it a foul on the ground, so I don't really see a clear and obvious error. Do you get what I'm saying? Where I think...
No, what you're pointing out is that there's a lack of clarity about the importance of the on-the-field decision. So it's something that we see other sports, right? We see it certainly in American sports. They talk about the call being overturned. In cricket, we see the kind of umpires call in certain cases. There's really no delineation. What is the role of the call on the field? And right now we're saying it doesn't really matter. We're seeking perfection. So the call will be right based on the video analysis of it, and that's it. Like, it doesn't matter what was called. But the problem is that some of these are judgment calls. And then what was called is going to influence the way. And what we're saying is it needs to be a clear, technically a clear and obvious error to overturn, right? But then offside, I don't know, honestly.
I think it depends on the specific play we're talking about. On penalties, for example, I think there's more weight given to whether the ref calls it a penalty or not. In other situations, right, where it's more cut and dry, let's say, offside, is the ball out? Is it not? When you're dealing with very less player intensive decisions, which doesn't involve in player to player contact, I think in those positions, you can rely more on the VAR and the referee's decision matters less. On things like fouls, it's going to matter more.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's got to be a delineation of in what case are you starting with a blank slate and in what case are you starting with the referee's decision. So it's good that you mentioned cricket, because there's a couple of examples in cricket. One is on LBW. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically there's an on-field decision given by the umpire. And because the technology is not 100% trusted, if it's somewhere, where it might hit the wicket, might not, they call it umpire's call. So they go with the on-field decision. Now, in the case of a catch, there used to be a soft signal, so they'd have to overturn it. But now they've completely gone to the blank slate. So whatever the umpire's decision is on the field, that doesn't matter. So I think that's something that they could delineate. Where do you take the umpire's call, or does VAR make the decision, completely? And I think in this case, they did that for the offside. They didn't do it for the others, which again, I actually agree with, because I think a push, there's so many decisions that we'll see like 50 times on the television, and we won't be able to come to agreement on it. Like,
you can't call a push like from VAR. That doesn't make. How do you determine if the contact? It doesn't make sense.
Right? I agree with you. And I think, so I think we just have to make sure that the processes are clearly defined.
Yeah. But it's hard, because let's take a tackle in the box. The referee on the field may not be able to see if the defender contacted the ball first or the player first, right? So there's an example where contact actually goes to VAR, because he may have seen that he couldn't really tell if it was a dive or not. So it gets really complicated in all these scenarios. And in theory, they should have one sort of rule, a different rule for each scenario. But then it just gets overcomplicated.
Yeah.
And in the end, even something like offsides, we've seen multiple decisions this year where there's debate. This one, was he offsides? Obviously, we are all known about the error in the Tottenham Liverpool game, but I just don't. We're pursuing perfection, and that's not what we should pursue. We should pursue these things in the spirit of the game, to make the game more entertaining and to ensure that competitors are not getting an advantage. So long as they're not getting an advantage, I don't really care, honestly.
Yeah, I think the point of referees in sports, is just kind of extrapolating out, is not to be involved. Like, that's the whole point of, obviously some refs, they love to be the center of attention, and I won't name names in the world of football or soccer. The viewers won't know them anyway, but there are certain referees out there that love to be part of the attention, and that's not the job. The job is to just step in, when you are needed, like a firefighter, right? You're just going in there when the call comes. But a lot of these guys, and in most cases they're guys, are wanting to put themselves into this game too much, I feel. And I think VAR has now lessened that a little bit. Or has it? That's the question. Or now has it made them more in the spotlight? I don't know.
I mean, I just can't. I mean, as a fan, I just hate the delay. The celebration delay is one of the most annoying things to happen as a fan, right? You're celebrating a goal, but then you can only you have to temper your celebration as a fan, because you're worried, I don't know. And then
Yeah.
3 minutes later, they go through the VAR, and then you give this sort of half-hearted little like, yeah, but like it's like two celebrations, and you don't know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. It makes it difficult as a fan.
Yeah,
That's true. I mean, like there's I don't think there's anything in sport compared to a goal in football. I think, just as a moment, whether it's tennis or, I mean, I guess rugby, potentially a try or whatever, or like in American football, like, point. But I don't know. It's one of those highs that you now have to, like you said, temper. So
yeah, it's not replicated in other sports. Well, overall, it was a great win for Newcastle. A good day for their Saudi Arabian ownership as well, which is
very good
segue to.
No, that was really well done.
Yeah, what Bick wants to talk about, because I think you know where we're going with this.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get into it. So Saudi have been awarded the World Cup. They did very well to come first in a pool of 1, because it was supposed to be a pool of 2, but Australia pulled out at the last minute.
Yeah.
I don't want to allege anything, but all I'll say is if 20 or 50 years down the line we find out that the Australian FA was given stuff in brown envelopes, I wouldn't be surprised, is all I'm saying. How do I feel about this? So I think, let me talk about the pros first.
Okay.
So I was pleasantly surprised by how good the World Cup in Qatar was.
Yeah.
I was a bit annoyed initially because we were told it was going to be a summer World Cup. They'd turn on the air conditioning, they'd figure out the technology, and then it turned out to be a winter World Cup. But I actually enjoyed that. I liked the general fan behavior. I think it was good, especially given some of the horrors we saw, especially by England fans in Euro 20, Euro 21, whatever you want to call it. I think the lack of alcohol in the stadium was a good thing. And I actually think Saudi will do a great job with the World Cup. I think the Middle East generally absolutely adores their football. They really love their football. And I'm glad they're getting another World Cup. I do wish, however, that it wasn't as soon as it is now, because it'll basically be 2 World Cups in the Middle East in the space of 12 years. I think it's too soon. I think Australia would have been a good decision. They've never hosted the football. I mean, they've hosted the Women's Football World Cup, but they haven't hosted the men's.
Right.
I think it would have generated a lot of interest. I think the fan experience there would also have been really good, because Australia is a country with a long tradition of sport, of success in sport, and of hosting tournaments. And yeah, I also think the other thing I was going to talk about is how I feel South America and Africa have been shafted as well, because the only reason that you had these 2 bids was because the only continents available to host were Asia and Oceania, because they didn't give South America that because they had because South America is hosting 2030, although it's only hosting 3 or 4 matches.
Right.
Morocco's representing all of Africa, and they're hosting a couple of matches, and then Spain and Portugal are obviously hosting less. So I don't think the 2030 World Cup counts as South American or African World Cups, but somehow it has been. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, it's interesting because I agree with you, and I'll let Rahi speak because he was actually at the Qatar World Cup. So but yes, they do put on phenomenal productions and all that sort of thing. FIFA's decision making has always been a question mark, and just like the world at large, there's less than reputable practices sometimes that go on, right?
Yeah.
And doing things where there's only, 1 bid, then you do this strange thing where you do some games in South America and then some games in, Iberia. I don't know. It's all very strange to me.
I think absolutely the decision-making process doesn't make anyone feel good, and the idea that just one country bid is not good at all, right? Just in the spirit of competition, you should have, in every single decision, you should have competitors. I understand that Australia pulled out, but you have to be able to find some competition. Otherwise, it feels like an unfair process.
Yeah.
I had an interesting similar reaction to you, Bick, in that the World Cup in Qatar, I initially reacted very negatively. They're cutting alcohol, they're moving it to the winter. I actually then had the fortune of going to this World Cup, and it was incredible. I mean, it was everything was organized perfectly. Fan behavior was the best I think it's ever been. There are other issues, certainly, that there were restrictions on what you could wear and things that I wasn't happy about. But on the field, I mean, you had some really, really, really good soccer being played. Maybe that had to do with the fact that it was in the winter. Yeah. And then you had probably the greatest World Cup final in the history of the tournament. I mean, I think it's difficult to debate that was the greatest final ever. And on many levels, it was all up there with the greatest World Cups ever. Yeah. So it's hard to debate the merits of Qatar's a different place, but Saudi Arabia hosting a World Cup with the resources they have and the show they're likely to put on. The problem I have is exactly your problem, is it doesn't feel like it's equitable at this point, right? It feels a little bit where Saudi is as a league and the way that they're growing as a league. It feels like very convenient that the World Cup is there because a lot of resources are being poured in. And I understand that makes sense. They did beat Argentina in the World Cup, but I'd love to have seen this World Cup, for example, in Korea or Japan, right? Places where, we haven't had a World Cup in East Asia in a long time, right? Since 2002, one of my favorite World Cups. And these are countries, and Korea, for example, is players throughout the Premier League. Japan, a team that's beaten all the big powers recently. So I'd love to have seen that. And I'd love to see a little bit more of a reward for performance on the field. That's the only issue I have with it. But ultimately, I think it's going to be an incredible World Cup.
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, performances on the field, yes and no, because I think there'll be 48 teams. So even if Saudi doesn't do that well, I think there'll be enough interest throughout. I mean, Qatar didn't go that far, right? So I think.
Yeah, but I think as a host, I think if you're giving a spot, okay, so Saudi would qualify automatically regardless.
Yeah.
But I do think, and it's a worse example than Qatar, I think, was given a spot even though they probably wouldn't have qualified or been they'd been very tight.
Right.
I think there should be some merit given to how your team performs. And then based on that, you should be able to host. Morocco, as good as they were, right? So they're host. Spain, Portugal, good teams, right? Like, for example, if India were to host a World Cup, they wouldn't deserve it at this point because they have no
not at this point
in a World Cup. I'm not comparing India to Saudi. That's not what I'm saying. Saudi's a much better team and they would easily qualify. But to see Qatar and Saudi in close succession, you get the question, you have to perform a little better at the World Cup. Saudi beat Argentina. I mean, they beat the winners. But maybe around 16. Maybe around 16, right?
Yeah, I mean, overall, they had a pretty decent, they were pretty competitive in most of the games. At the Mexico game, there was like moments in that one too, though, actually, where they performed, right? But, I thought the Poland game, I thought they were superior for a lot of that game. And just things just didn't go their way. It's interesting just because of everything else that's going on with Saudi Arabia, like you brought up. There's heavy investment in the game, obviously in the top leagues in Europe, right? We just mentioned Newcastle. There's heavy investment in their domestic league by bringing in top players, and now they have, a World Cup. So if you take away FIFA's checkered history, you would think, okay, this seems to be an emerging footballing nation. But since we know, with FIFA's ties to money and financial gain, and the fact that the Middle East is a region that obviously has a lot of money, and Saudi Arabia specifically has the ability to, spend enough on these different endeavors, there's always going to be those questions asked, right? From that perspective.
But I think the point you bring up actually, and the argument to what you're saying is that let's set aside some bias that we have that there was money changed hands or that there was some foul play. The process wasn't competitive, but that is just because Saudi has the resources to be able to build the stadiums and put on this World Cup without a financial burden that would negatively impact the country, right? So
100%.
on the other side, you cannot discredit they have the resources and they're putting them to good use, and they are effectively a prime candidate because financially they have the means to support a tournament like this and put on a good show. So on the other hand, we kind of like it could end up being a very smart decision.
Yeah.
And the reason other countries are pulled out is because they don't have the means to do this.
Yeah.
So then you can't really, I mean, it goes into the decision and into the thought process, but it's maybe a smart way to look at things from FIFA's standpoint.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only reason I might think slightly more negatively about Australia pulling out last minute is because Australia does have the ability and the money and the history of host. They don't have to build a bunch of new stadiums.
Yeah,
They've got some of the best stadiums in the world across other sports. They've hosted cricket and rugby World Cup finals. They've hosted the Olympics. So I think if they just stayed in and Saudi would have won, would have been okay. And again, I'm not pissed off about the decision. Like I was with Qatar initially, which I ended up really enjoying the World Cup in the end. So if they'd hosted in 2042 or 2046 or something, I would have been perfectly fine with it. So it's just pushed up a few years. And it's fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up the main points from the weekend. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more to talk about MLS domestically for I know all these MLS fans out there watching.
I need to say one thing about the MLS playoffs. As a self-proclaimed Euro snob, that's the American term for someone who doesn't defend MLS the way they should. Bix, that's what we call them, Euro snobs, and I'm one of those.
I'm aware. I did live in the US for a bit.
Okay. So the MLS playoffs were actually quite exciting this weekend, I would say. They've changed it to a very American-style format where you play best of 3. So you win a game, and then you have to win 2 out of 3. Surprisingly, a lot of teams won the first game and then lost the second game on the road. So it's actually made for kind of an exciting setup. I'm kind of liking it. It's so American, but at the moment, it's kind of working. So reluctantly, I'll say that I enjoyed the MLS playoffs, and I'm enjoying the MLS playoffs. So stay tuned. See if I
Big. I think you need to tune in. There was a game that went into penalties, 8-7 in penalties this weekend between Cincinnati and
New York Red Bulls. Had 3 chances. I think 3 chances to win it in penalties and didn't, and then they lost.
So it's more there's a lot of excitement out there.
You call them the England of the MLS.
The Red Bulls of Cincinnati.
No, the Red Bulls. They lost in shootouts.
Cincinnati made it through. But okay, we'll be coming to you every week. Sorry?
I said that Cincinnati would then be the Germany of the MLS.
Or the Italy, anyone that's beaten England penalties.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Which
Argentina. We could go on.
We could go on.
the list could go on and on. But yeah, so until next time, we'll be coming to you every weekend with the best events, or at least the events that we want to talk about, which may not have been the best events. You may have something else. Maybe you watched the FA Cup this whole weekend. It's quite possible.
Yeah.
But there were some crack nail biters in there with Wrexham versus Mansfield Town, and
I'm not going to lie, I didn't watch any of the FA Cup.
Right.
But I will be watching the Spurs-Chelsea match, which should be a good match. Or not, given Chelsea.
Spurs-Chelsea match, and we didn't get a chance to talk about Luton Town getting the draw against Liverpool, which was a good result for them.
That was great.
So don't sleep on the little guys. But anyhow, until next week, enjoy your week. Keep watching the beautiful game. Enjoy the Champions League, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Enjoy the MLS playoffs.